right, good morning everyone. I'm so glad you are here this morning as we are finally wrapping up this series called Gifted, with which we've been busy for the last few months. Now, in case you missed any of our previous messages, please go to our YouTube channel and catch up, because it's quite an important topic, and one that's not that often addressed in churches. And I believe that it can really make a very positive difference and a massive difference to each one of us individually, but also to us as a church as a whole. You see, each one of us has been given certain spiritual gifts, and we are supposed to use those gifts not for our own benefit, but for the benefit of the rest of the church, the rest of the people sitting around you. And therefore, it's my hope, friends, it's my prayer that at the end of this series, where we are right now, that you will first and foremost, that you are more informed about the gifts of the Spirit. I mean, this is what we are told to do in 1 Corinthians 12, verse 1. We read this. It says, "Now about the gifts of the Spirit, brothers and sisters, I do not want you to be uninformed." And so I set out to make sure that you are very well informed about this topic. And I know I gave you a lot of information. Some of the messages were quite higher grade, and I hope you could keep up with all of that. But I do hope that you are definitely more clued up about this topic here at the end of the series than you were before. I really hope so. The second aim of this series, though, was that you would discover what the Spirit gifted you with, and that you will decide to actually take the step up and use those gifts in the church where God has called you to be. And that you will make yourself available to be used by God the way He intended to use you, and that is for the benefit of those around you. And so if you haven't done so yet, please just ask the Holy Spirit to show you clearly where you can use your gifts, what gifts, first of all, you have, and then secondly, how you can use it to build the rest of the church, and how you can just be available to be used by Him. So last week, I sort of summarized the whole series, and I gave out little questionnaires, and they're all still here on some of the chairs. And we'd actually like everyone to fill one of those in. And if you don't quite understand all the different gifts and all, come to me or go to our YouTube channel, look at last week's message, or come to me and I'll explain it a little bit to you. But the bottom bit is quite important, where you say what gifts you think you've been given, and then how you will use it in this church. So we actually would like everybody to fill one of those in and put it in the collection plates at the end, or just come and give it to me. That would be really good. Friends, this church needs you to be you. Let me just say that again. This church needs you to be you. Each one of you are here for a reason. And you're not supposed to be someone else, or to serve in a capacity that doesn't fit with who you are. But if you're going to use the gift that God has entrusted to you, as well as the resources He's entrusted to you, and the talents, and the experience, and the personality, and the passions that you have to help build this church, I believe we are actually going to fulfill our purpose as a church as well. Purpose God created us for, why He placed us here. However, for that to happen, you need to be you, and you need to make yourself available to be used by the Spirit. Now, as I said several times during this whole series, that there are 4 main passages in the Bible that speaks about the spiritual gift. And we find them in Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians 4, and 1 Peter 4. And of all these passages, though, 1 Corinthians 12 is probably the most thorough. And actually, just 2 chapters later, in 1 Corinthians 14, the Apostle Paul expanded on his teaching about some of the gifts. And he told this congregation how it should actually operate within their meetings, within their church services, basically. In fact, if you were here when I spoke about the so-called utterance gifts, so this was quite a few weeks ago, probably a month ago, you will remember that I quoted a lot of verses from 1 Corinthians 14. However, slap bang in the middle of these 2 chapters, between 12 and 14, you find a very well-known chapter of the Bible, probably one of those passages, together I would say with Psalm 23, that is known by many people who are not Jesus followers, many people who've almost never been in a church. I'm speaking of 1 Corinthians 13, of course, the chapter on love. That's probably used more at weddings than any other text anywhere. I'm sure you're all familiar with that passage. What you need to remember, though, is that Paul didn't write the letter to the church of Corinth in chapters. Okay? In fact, no part of the Bible was written in chapters and verses. That was only put in later so that we can easier navigate a text a little bit easier, just to make it easier to understand it and find places within the Bible. But that was not how he wrote it. This was simply a letter that Paul wrote to a church where there were a lot of issues. And one of them being a confusion about the spiritual gifts. So it appears, apparently, if you read the text, it appears as though there were some people who said that the gift of speaking in tongues was superior to some of the other gifts. And it was made into some kind of criteria for so-called true believers. And Paul then clearly dished this idea, and he gave some very clear and unambiguous teaching on this whole topic, which is what we have aimed to do in this whole series as well. But right in the middle of this teaching, we find this piece on love, 1 Corinthians 13. And what we need to realize is that Paul wasn't interrupting his train of thought. He was continuing his train of thought. So you actually get chapter 14 that follows on chapter 13. And so it's 12, 13, 14. There's a logical sequence in his thinking. And he was making the point that if love doesn't control the way you employ whatever gifts have been entrusted to you, then your gift, whatever that may be, is worthless. Then your gift is worthless. Spiritual gifts are a wonderful blessing from God. But unless it and everything else you do is rooted in love, you're completely missing the whole point. So to remind you of the context, let's start reading at the end of chapter 12, and we'll just continue reading. That's okay. So let's just do that. So we'll start at 1 Corinthians 12, verse 27. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is part of it. And God has placed in the church, first of all, apostles, second, prophets, third, teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, of helping, of guidance, and of different kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? Now eagerly desire the greater gifts. And yet, I will show you the most excellent way. Paul says that all these gifts, they're great. They're important in the church, yet there is a way that is above all else. He says, I will show you an excellent way. I will show you a gift that is greater than any of the other gifts I've spoken about in 1 Corinthians 12 or in any of the other letters. And then he starts this famous chapter. And he starts it with these words. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Even if you are as spiritual as they come, even if you could speak in tongues so regularly that you can actually converse with angels, but you look down on other people, then you're just making a lot of noise. And Paul says that's quite irritating. It's like a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. He says that even if you preach like Billy Graham, even if you've got the ability to tell other people what God's will for their lives is, and you can tell them specifically what it is with the gift of prophecy. If you're walking around with many degrees in theology, you have all the knowledge, and if you have such incredible faith that you can actually move mountains, but you do any of those things without love, then you are nothing. And it's not as though Paul is saying that then your works will mean nothing. He actually says that it will affect your identity. He says this will affect who you are. He says if you don't have love, without love, you are nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. If you just give to others so that you can receive in turn, you give to other people so that hopefully it will come back to you, regardless of how much you give or sacrifice, it actually means nothing unless you're motivated by love for God and for other people. In fact, he uses quite an extreme example, in this text. So he uses the example of martyrdom, of someone whose faith goes so deep, whose commitment is actually unquestionable. However, if it's disconnected from love, if it's purely about self-gain or about your own accomplishments instead of love, then you've gained nothing. Then Paul says it's absolutely worthless. In other words, friends, it doesn't matter what spiritual gifts you may have, whether that is the gift of faith or the gift of giving or the gift of even of miraculous powers or healing other people. It doesn't matter how eloquent you are or even that you may be able to recite the Bible back to front if you don't have love. Paul says that a standard here is not how much you know. It's not even what you can do. It's how much you care. That is the standard. And unfortunately, we often focus on everything that needs to be done. All the programs, all the ministries we have to do. And in the process, we neglect truly loving each other. So often, it's not the fact that people may have different opinions that fuels quarreling among people, but rather that love is not paramount. The moment you take love out of the equation, you are nothing, regardless of how fancy or religious or good you may look. Because then it is all about you. And life is not about you. It's about loving God and loving other people. And so the implicit question is, okay, what does true love then look like? What does true love look like? I mean, how should the gifts of the Spirit operate if love is the standard we should try and meet? Or even more than that, how should we live as Jesus followers who have been called to love our neighbors as ourselves? What does that look like? Now, the good news, friends, is that Paul actually answered these questions in just the next few verses. The bad news is they're not so easy to do. Okay, they're not also always that easy to do. In fact, most of them are quite counterintuitive. It goes in against what we naturally want to do. We don't want to do these things. However, I believe that if we were to incorporate these 15 characteristics, I know it's quite a lot, these 15 characteristics into our daily life, that it would have a radical, life-changing impact on all our relationships. From our marriage to your relationship with that difficult colleague at work. It can change everything. Unfortunately, the world and our culture gave us the absurd idea that love is something over which we have absolutely zero control. And our language actually reflects it. We speak about these things all the time. We say things like you fall in love, like you walk along and you fall into a ditch. Or you fall out of love, like you fall out of a tree. Like you have absolutely no control over it at all. However, the biblical view is slightly different because God commands us to love each other. And so if He commands it, it means that you can decide whether you want to obey it or not, which means that love is a choice. Love is actually a choice. 1 John 3 says this: if anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. This means that you may be in situations where it's really difficult to love someone, and the feelings aren't quite there yet towards them. Still, you are called to act in love towards them. That is why love is called a choice. However, as we're going to read the rest of 1 Corinthians 13, you will also see that love is clearly a feeling as well, which implies that love is both action and affection. It's both. In other words, if you love someone practically and you seek their best interest, but the feeling is not quite there yet, you can ask God to cultivate that in your heart, and that the Spirit would awaken that desire in your heart to truly care for them, not just serve them, but to truly care for them, regardless of how they might act towards you. So let's just read what Paul actually had to say about love. He said, love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy, does not boast, it's not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. 15 characteristics. I'm going to unpack them very quickly. So let's go through them. The first one is love is patient. Now, when it comes to spiritual gifts, and this is the context what Paul is speaking about. So when it comes to spiritual gifts, the idea Paul wants to convey here is that we should be patient with one another because we all have different gifts. So instead of judging or criticizing other people for the way they use their gifts, be patient with others. This is also great practical advice, friends, for anyone in any relationship. Be patient with each other. We all have our struggles. We all have our pain. We all have our hurt. So take that into account when you respond to someone else. Remember their story. Know that we are all in different places in our journey. So be patient with each other, even if others don't necessarily react in the way you would have hoped they would react. Secondly, Paul says love is kind. Now, unfortunately, one can be patient, but you can still be mean. Okay, you can put up with somebody else, but you can still hate them deep down. However, genuine love cultivates feelings of tender-heartedness towards others. And therefore, when it comes to people using their spiritual gifts, or just in day-to-day relationships as well, decide to use words of affirmation rather than words of condemnation. In other words, be kind. Be kind. Paul says, love does not envy. If someone has received a spiritual gift and you haven't got that gift, don't be jealous of them. Remember, it's the Spirit who gives the gifts to whom He wants, when He wants. And this is also a great principle just for life in general. Learn to celebrate the success of other people. Be genuinely happy for others without being jealous of them. Friends, you will be amazed at a positive difference it will make to your relationships when you're not comparing yourself to other people. Whether that is, it's thinking that, because comparing is a bit of a slippery slope. Because either you're thinking they are better than you, which will lead to envy, or you will think you are better than them, which leads to the next one. Love does not boast. I would sum up both these characteristics, and I would say that love does not compare. Love does not compare. Because the moment you start to compare what you have or who you are with others, you will either be jealous of them or you will look down on them. And neither is love. So comparison is a slippery slope. It's very dangerous. Love is not proud. In other words, love is humble. It's having a realistic view of yourself, knowing that everything you have comes from God, including your spiritual gifts. And therefore, don't be arrogant about any gifts or talents or resources that you've received, or any opportunities that may come your way. Don't be arrogant about it, but realize that it all comes from God. And if He wanted to, He could take it away in a heartbeat, or possibly, and probably more accurately, He could take it away in the lack of a heartbeat. Because that's just the way life works. Okay, love does not dishonor others. In some translations, it says that love is not rude. Love is not rude. And I think Paul may be referring to people who were inconsiderate and didn't take others' opinions or feelings into account, but just steamrollered ahead, regardless of what other people might think or feel. That would be to dishonor other people. And we are not called to live that way. It says love is not self-seeking. Another translation says that love does not insist on its own way. Speak of something that sounds counterintuitive. Love does not insist on its own way. This means that when it comes to spiritual gifts, that you ask how you can put others first and how you can serve other people. And for life in general, you will also ask how you can put others' interests above your own. Even when you may feel legitimately you're entitled to something. How can you still put somebody else's interest above your own? Now, if you think that this one is hard, wait until you hear the next one. Love is not easily angered. Some translation says, love is not irritable. Anybody feel convicted about this one? You sometimes irritable? I'm not going to ask you to put up your hand, but I see the smiles here, so I know. I think we are all sometimes a bit touchy or overly sensitive, and it doesn't take much to anger us. Friends, if we want to be loving, we need to learn to be slow to anger. And often that means forcing ourselves to listen carefully and not speak too soon. Just listen to James's advice. He said, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Love keeps no record of wrongs. So let's just say you've managed the previous one, okay, and you're not easily angered. You got that one right. You're not so easily angry. You're not so irritable. But there comes a time when someone really oversteps and they do offend you. They do something that's genuinely wrong towards you and it's totally uncalled for. What should you do? Apparently, the loving thing to do is to not keep a record of it so that you can take it out at some stage and throw it in their faces. Apparently, true love doesn't keep score. Love is quick not only just to forgive, but also to forget. Love doesn't constantly consult the filing cabinet where a list of wrong things people have done towards you is kept up to date so you can take it out at any time you want to use it. You know, my big mentor at Stellenbosch, when I was at uni, Professor Lowe, he always spoke about, he spoke about the knapsak of teleurstellings. Knapsak van teleurstelling. So it's roughly the fanny pack of disappointments. That's the best translation I could come up with. You know, it's like this little pack you keep here, and this is what couples often have. Married couples often have that, you know, and they keep all the disappointments there. Whenever anybody else has done anything towards them, they keep it there, and then at the next fight, they take that little pack out and they put it all in front of the other person. Paul says, that's not how love works. That's not love at all. Nowhere should that be the case. Not in the church and not at home either. Love does not delight in evil. So does that now mean that we should just let any wrongdoing go? Or even worse, when somebody does something wrong, when they mess up or abuse their spiritual gifts, should we be happy about it? Should we feel more righteous when somebody else seemingly isn't that righteous? Love says no. Unfortunately, some people love to gossip. They just love to gossip. And they get a kick out of it when somebody else stumbles or somebody else falls. Because then they feel better about themselves for not committing a similar offense. Paul says, love doesn't do that. Love doesn't do that. Love rejoices with the truth. Instead, love will look for opportunities to affirm those who have done well. Love is always on the lookout for the chance to shine a light on something done right or a truth made known. Love always protects. It makes people feel safe, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Love always trusts. It gives people the benefit of the doubt until all the facts are known. It is generous and accepting rather than cynical and suspicious. Love holds us back from automatically assuming the worst about someone else or jumping to premature conclusions about their character. Just let us hold fire. It trusts. Love always hopes. Love gives people second chances, sometimes third chances, fourth chances, fifth chances. Or maybe love just followed Jesus' advice of forgiving people 70 times 7. In other words, look for the best in people and only concede the worst when evidence is absolutely overwhelming. And then at that point, still be kind and forgiving. Why? Because love always hopes. Love always hopes. And then it comes the last one. Love always perseveres. Even when things are really tough, love doesn't give up and it doesn't give in. And the reason we can continue to love even when it is difficult is because we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. So friends, even if in the worst possible circumstances, God is still in control. He's still in control. And that is why we can also persevere instead of giving up. Now friends, let's just read all 15 characteristics again. But this time, as we do it, I want to challenge you to substitute the word love for your name. Okay, so for instance, instead of saying love is patient, you say your name, like Jaco is patient, or Elise is patient, or Peter is patient. You put your own name in there. And you just say it that way. So, and then you ask yourself, does that ring true of me or not? Okay, so, and this will just give you a very clear idea of what you need to focus on if you want to love those around you a little bit better. Friends, this is the standard we are called to. Doesn't mean we've all attained it, but this is the standard we are called to. So let's be honest with ourselves, and those are the characteristics. And I'm just going to read the text, and I want you to follow along with those ones, and just put your name in as I read each one of them, and see if that is true or not. Just check your own heart, and ask the Spirit to just reveal that to you right now. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects. It always trusts. Always hopes. Always perseveres. Are any of them true of you? Are any of them not true of you? This is the standard to which we are called to love others. In this church, at home, in our workplaces, wherever we go. Friends, I honestly believe that incorporating this into our daily lives will have a huge impact on all our relationships, wherever we go. In fact, just listen to this verse, 1 Peter 4 verse 8. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. I mean, imagine that. A love that is so big that it covers our sins. Well, actually, you don't have to imagine that at all, because that is exactly what Jesus did for us on the cross. It's exactly what he did. And he's asking us to extend the same grace and the same love towards others as he has shown us. To be honest, he isn't actually asking us. He's actually commanding us. John 13, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Love is what should set us apart, friends. In fact, if you're still struggling to make this one practical, Paul gives us a great rule of thumb in one of his other letters, the one to the Philippians. He said this: do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Friends, put others' interests above your own and ask yourself what someone else needs and how you can help them with that, rather than just thinking about what you want or even what you need. This means that you will have to die to yourself. You will have to die to your own expectations. And you will have to trust that God will fulfill your deepest needs. And I can tell you this, I know this will be extremely hard. But just listen to this amazing promise in 1 Corinthians 13. Paul says next, he says, love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. Now, friends, I don't know what your strategy currently is to overcome the issues that you may be facing in your life right now. All I know is that it says here that love never fails. Love never fails. And therefore, friends, I think this may be the best course of action for all of us to take, even if it is hard, even if it is difficult. In fact, you know what? Paul ends this famous chapter with the following words, and he says this, he says, and now these three remain, faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. In the end, it will all disappear, friends. It's all going to disappear. Everything you worked so hard for will cease to exist. Your job, gone. Your gadgets, gone. Your house, gone. Even the spiritual gifts will be gone. But faith, hope, and love, they will remain. They will stand the test of time. And of all of them, love is the greatest. And so Paul starts the next chapter with these words, and he says, follow the way of love and eagerly desire gifts of the Spirit. And therefore, friends, may you all desire the gifts of the Spirit and discover the gifts that have been entrusted to you to build the rest of the church. Above all, though, may you follow the way of love by putting others' interests above your own, serving and giving to them in love, so that you can become loving by giving, simply because you are already so incredibly giving. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for all the gifts you have given each one of us. Thank you for making us part of your church and calling us to your service. Please, Lord, help us to take our place and serve others with true love, no matter where we are. In Jesus' name we pray.